Hey guys, tonight we are going to journey back to a time when our world was an almost unrecognizable alien planet, a world of ice and monsters. We're traveling to the heart of the last great ice age. Imagine, we are floating in the silent cold of space, looking down at the Earth as it was 20,000 years ago. Before you lies not the familiar blue marble, but a planet half drowned in white. A colossal sheet of ice, miles thick, smothers the top of the globe, burying entire continents. This is the Last Glacial Maximum, a planetary winter that has held the world in its grip for millennia. From this godlike vantage point, you can see the ice breathing, a slow, imperceptible crawl that has ground mountains to dust and pushed coastlines out to sea. But down there, in that seemingly endless winter, life clings on. In the shadow of these glaciers, colossal beasts with fur like tangled wire and tusks like scythes tear at the frozen grasses. And among them, a new, fragile creature, cloaked in scavenged hides and armed with slivers of sharpened stone, is beginning its relentless march across the globe. U.S. Over thousands of years, these ancestors of ours will push through frozen valleys, hunt creatures that dwarf modern elephants, and paint their epic stories on the walls of hidden caves. They will witness the planet heave and groan as the ice finally begins to retreat, and they will see a world of giants vanish before their very eyes. So how did anything survive in such a brutal, frozen world? What were these incredible beasts that ruled the Ice Age plains? And what role did we, the clever, persistent apes, play in their ultimate extinction? Thanks to the incredible stories written in ice cores, fossils, and our own ancient art, tonight we will venture into this lost world together to find the answers. Frankly, if you were dropped onto that landscape without a good fire and a very, very thick coat, you wouldn't survive long enough to appreciate the majestic, frozen scenery. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. That small click sends a big signal to the algorithm. That long-form, serious educational content still matters. And to me, it's an incredibly meaningful show of support. Thank you so much for helping keep this channel going strong. It always fascinates me to see where you're all tuning in from. Let me know in the comments where you are in the world and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on a vast, silent plain. The term Ice Age feels a bit simple for what this truly is. To be precise, you're in the Pleistocene epoch, a geological period that stretched for over 2.5 million years, a time of immense climatic mood swings. The Earth would plunge into long, cold glacial periods, then briefly thaw into warmer interglacials, over and over again. You are now in the deepest part of the last great cold spell, the Last Glacial Maximum. This isn't just a bad winter, it's a planetary state of being. The cause for this rhythmic freezing and thawing is a kind of cosmic waltz. It's a scientific theory known as Milankovitch cycles, and it describes how the Earth's relationship with the Sun changes over vast timescales. Think of it as the planet's slow, deep breathing. The shape of Earth's orbit stretches from circular to elliptical. Its tilt on its axis wobbles like a spinning top, and its orientation drifts. These three overlapping rhythms dictate how much sunlight reaches the northern latitudes, and when they all align just right, they pull the trigger for an ice age. The effects are profound. You feel it in the air. The global average temperature is about 6 degrees Celsius or 11 degrees Fahrenheit, cooler than the world you know. That might not sound like much, but it's enough to completely re-engineer the planet. The atmosphere is drier and full of dust kicked up from exposed continental shelves and barren landscapes. With so much of the world's water locked up in ice, the water cycle has slowed down. Rainfall is scarce. This world is not just cold, it's thirsty. Above all, you are in the shadow of the cryosphere, the dominion of ice. To your north, a wall of white stretches from the horizon to the clouds. This is the edge of the Laurentide ice sheet, a single glacier covering most of Canada and the northern United States. It is, in places, over 3 kilometers or 2 miles thick. Its sheer weight is so immense that it has pressed the Earth's crust down into the mantle like a thumb on a rubber ball. It grinds forward with unimaginable force, pulverizing bedrock into fine dust and shoving entire forests aside as if they were weeds. Geologists still debate the exact speed at which these ice sheets could advance or retreat, but on a human time scale, its presence is absolute and terrifying. Occasionally, you might stumble upon a truly bizarre sight. A single, house-sized boulder sitting alone in the middle of a flat plain, hundreds of miles from the nearest mountain. These are glacial erratics, rocks that were picked up by the ice, carried on a journey of centuries, and then gently set down as the glacier melted away, leaving a geological calling card for you to find. This vast lockup of water has one other world-altering effect. The oceans have fallen. With sea levels 120 meters, or 400 feet, lower than they are in modern times, the coastlines of the continents have expanded dramatically. This has revealed connections, land bridges that turn the world map inside out. Between Asia and North America lies a vast, cold steppe called Beringia. Britain is not an island, but a northern peninsula of Europe, connected by a sweep of hills and rivers now called Doggerland. Australia and New Guinea are one. These bridges are the highways for the great migrations of this era, allowing animals, and eventually you, to walk to new worlds. You are standing in a world that is bigger, colder, drier, and ruled by ice. As you leave the shadow of the great northern glaciers and travel south, the landscape begins to change. You've come to Africa, the continent that played by a different set of rules during the Ice Age. While much of the world shivered and dried out, Africa experienced its own unique and paradoxical transformations. It's also the only continent where you, a modern human, are not an alien invasive species. This is your ancestral homeland. Your kind has been here for hundreds of thousands of years, and the animals here know you. They have grown up alongside clever, tool-wielding apes. This long shared history, this co-evolution, is perhaps why Africa was spared the worst of the mass extinctions that would later claim the giants of every other continent. The animals here learned to be wary. They had a head start. But the most startling feature of Ice Age Africa isn't just its fauna's resilience. It's the climate's strange behavior. You are standing on the edge of the Sahara, a name synonymous with endless, searing desert. But the scene before you is wrong. It's not an ocean of sand. Instead, you see vast grasslands stretching to the horizon, dotted with acacia trees and crisscrossed by the trails of migrating animals. This is the great paradox of the era, the African humid period. Counterintuitively, the same orbital wobbles that plunged the north into ice created a pulse of life here. A slight shift in the Earth's tilt strengthened the West African monsoon, dragging life-giving rains much farther north into the heart of the Sahara. The proof of this lost green world isn't just speculation. Scientists have drilled deep into the Atlantic seabed, off the coast of Africa, and pulled up sediment cores that act as a planetary timeline. In these cores, the layers corresponding to the Ice Age show less desert dust and more pollen from savanna grasses and Mediterranean trees. It's the planet's own fossilized weather report, telling a clear story of a greener past. You walk for days across this grassy landscape until you reach the shore of an unbelievable body of water. It's a freshwater sea that shimmers to the horizon, so vast it dwarfs any lake you know from the modern world. This is Lake Mega Chad. At its peak, it was a colossal inland ocean, 1 million square kilometers in area, making the modern Caspian Sea look like a pond. Today, the pitifully small Lake Chad is all that remains, a puddle in the basin of a former giant. But back then, it was the heart of a thriving ecosystem, its shores teeming with life. Further on, you find shelter in a rocky overhang, and on the cool, dark stone, you see paintings left by people who lived here thousands of years ago. The images are ghostly white and ochre red, depicting figures with elegant, elongated bodies. They are not hunting mammoths or rhinos. They are swimming, arching their bodies in graceful strokes through clear water. You are in the Cave of Swimmers, a place now located in one of the driest, most inhospitable parts of the Egyptian desert, hundreds of miles from any significant body of water. These paintings are a human testament to the green Sahara, a postcard from a lost, watery world. This evidence raises fascinating questions. Archaeologists still argue whether the Sahara's green corridors were continuous enough for large-scale human and animal migrations, or were more like a string of seasonal oases, a chain of life-saving islands in a sea of encroaching sand. This entire system acted as a massive environmental pump. For a few thousand years, the desert would bloom, drawing life in from the tropics and the Mediterranean coast. Then, as the Earth's orbit shifted once more, the monsoon would retreat south, the grasslands would wither, and the sands would return, pushing all that life back out again. This constant pulsing of green and yellow, wet and dry, was a powerful engine of evolution, a cycle of boom and bust that shaped the incredible animals who called this paradoxical world home. Walking the shores of Lake Mega Chad, you see that the grasslands are not empty. They are alive with herbivores on a scale that dwarfs even the modern Serengeti. These are the great engines of the ecosystem, and some of them are unlike anything alive today. Your eye is first drawn to a bizarre, elephant-like creature, but something is wrong with its face. This is Deinotherium, a name that translates to terrible beast. It's an ancient relative of the elephant, but its tusks are all wrong. Instead of sweeping up from its upper jaw, two powerful downward curving tusks jut out from its chin like a giant fearsome hoe. For centuries, paleontologists have puzzled over these tusks. You watch as the creature lumbers over to a tree, hooks its strange tusks under a large branch, and pulls down, effortlessly snapping it to get at the tender leaves. This is one theory in action. Others suggest it used them to dig for nutritious roots and tubers, or perhaps to strip bark from trees. Paleontologists still debate the primary function of Deinotherium's unique tusks, with theories ranging from these feeding aids to social display or defense. Whatever their use, they mark this animal as a truly unique experiment in proboscidean evolution. Out on the open savanna, you see a herd that looks vaguely familiar, yet far more intimidating. These are pelorovis, the giant buffalo of the Ice Age. They resemble a modern African buffalo, but they are larger, heavier, with some males reaching an astonishing 2,000 kilograms. Their most striking feature is their horns, which sweep out and down in immense, graceful curves, sometimes spanning more than 3 meters from tip to tip. These are not the nervous, flighty grazers of a peaceful pasture. They are living fortresses, and a herd of them moving together would have been one of the most formidable sights on the continent. The scientific proof of their lifestyle is etched into the very enamel of their fossilized teeth. Isotope analysis, which reads the chemical signatures of the plants and animal éter, reveals a diet composed almost entirely of grass. This confirms their role as bulk grazers, the great lawn mowers of this expanded African savanna, and a prime target for the era's formidable predators. Near the water's edge, you see another giant, this one wallowing in the shallows. It's a hippopotamus, but again, larger and stranger than its modern relatives. This is Hippopotamus gorgops. What sets it apart are its eyes. The orbits of its skull are raised up on short stalks, like tiny periscopes. This adaptation allowed it to see its surroundings, spotting threats or rivals, while keeping almost its entire massive body submerged and hidden beneath the water. It was perfectly suited to the larger, deeper river systems of the African humid period. Amidst these true giants, you spot a herd of animals that seems to bridge the gap between the ancient past and the modern world. It's a type of zebra, but one that looks like it ran out of ink halfway through being painted. This is the quagga. Its front half is covered in the familiar bold stripes of a zebra, but they fade into a plain, brownish gray at its hindquarters. It's a quirky and beautiful creature, a unique subspecies of the plains zebra. Tragically, the quagga survived the Ice Age, only to be hunted to extinction by European settlers in the late 19th century. Yet, in a fascinating twist, a dedicated group of scientists in South Africa is now engaged in a selective breeding project, using closely related zebras to try and bring back the quagga's unique coat pattern from the brink. A strange and hopeful epilogue for an animal that once grazed these Pleistocene plains. The abundance of giant herbivores meant that this world could also support a terrifying array of predators. You approach a wide, slow-moving river, a place that promises life-giving water, but always demands a price. You feel a primal caution, a genetic memory of the dangers that lurk in calm water. As you watch, a log you hadn't noticed before detaches from the far bank and glides silently into the current. But it's not a log. It's a crocodile of monstrous proportions. This is Crocodylus thorbjarnarsoni, a giant from the Kenyan river basins that could reach lengths of over 7.5 meters or 25 feet. It was one of the largest true crocodiles ever to live, a living nightmare designed to ambush anything that dared to lower its head for a drink. For the small, vulnerable hominids that shared this landscape, this creature was a constant, lurking threat. It's a chilling thought that for millions of years, the simple act of getting water was a life-or-death gamble, and many of our distant ancestors undoubtedly ended their stories in the jaws of such a beast. Away from the river, in the tall grasses and rocky kopjes, a more specialized killer is on the hunt. You catch a flash of movement, a powerfully built cat, about the size of a jaguar, stalking a small group of early hominids. This is Dinophalis, often called the false saber-tooth. While its canines were not as long as the more famous Smilodon, they were still formidable, and this cat has a dark reputation. It is considered by many paleontologists to be a specialist hunter of primates, including our own relatives. The evidence for this is both direct and terrifying. In the caves of South Africa, researchers have found the fossilized skulls of early hominids like Australopithecus, and on them 2 distinct puncture marks. These marks are a perfect match, both in size and spacing, for the upper canine teeth of Dinofelis. It's a fossilized crime scene, a cold case millions of years old that tells a brutal story of who hunted whom on the African savanna. The primates of this era were not all helpless prey, however. You crest a ridge and look down upon a troop of baboons, but they are giants. This is Dinopithecus, an extinct baboon that was twice the size of any living today, with large males easily weighing as much as a grown man. They are powerfully built, with deep chests and long, muscular limbs. As one of the males yawns, you see a flash of immense, dagger-like canine teeth, far larger than a leopard's. A troop of these animals would have been a formidable force, capable of defending themselves from most predators through sheer numbers and aggression. This raises an interesting question for scientists. Primatologists continue to discuss whether the massive size of Dinopithecus was primarily for defense against the formidable predators of the time, or if it was driven by intense intra-species competition, with the largest and most intimidating males dominating the troop, much like modern mandrills. Adding to this rich primate landscape was another large, now extinct monkey called Theropithecus brumpti. Weighing around 40 kilograms, this was a highly terrestrial species, spending its life on the ground, another testament to the richness of the savanna environment. This was a world of giants, where even the monkeys were megafauna, and our own ancestors had to navigate a complex social and predatory landscape, armed with little more than their wits and their growing ability to cooperate. You now leave the familiar landscapes of Africa and cross the ocean, traveling to a world that took a completely different evolutionary path. You have arrived in Ice Age Australia, an isolated continent, a grand biological experiment running in parallel to the rest of the world. To understand the profound strangeness of the creatures here, you have to go back much further than the Pleistocene. You have to go back almost 100 million years to when Australia, attached to Antarctica, ripped itself away from the supercontinent of Gondwana and began a long, lonely journey across the sea. For millions of years, it was an island adrift, and on this island, a different kind of mammal rose to prominence. This became the kingdom of the Marsupials. While placental mammals, the group that includes everything from mice to elephants to us, were taking over the rest of the globe, Australia's marsupials were busy filling all the same ecological roles. There were marsupial grazers, marsupial browsers, marsupial climbers, and terrifying marsupial predators. They were a separate, magnificent answer to the question of what a mammal could be. The continent's isolation was so profound that before the arrival of the first humans, the only placental mammals that ever managed to make the crossing from Southeast Asia were a few species of bats and rats. This long separation created a menagerie of life that was, and still is, wonderfully weird. Modern genetic sequencing provides the definitive proof of this great divorce. The DNA of kangaroos, koalas, and wombats tells an unambiguous story of a common ancestor that diverged from the placental lineage while dinosaurs still walked the earth. However, this unique world was about to suffer a catastrophic blow. As the Ice Age reached its peak and humans made their first tentative landfalls, Australia was on the brink of an extinction event of almost unimaginable proportions. Of all the continents, Australia was the hardest hit, losing over 90% of its megafauna, any animal larger than a human. The great beasts that had dominated this land for millions of years vanished in what was, geologically speaking, the blink of an eye. Why this happened is one of the most contentious and fascinating mysteries in paleontology. The debate over Australia's megafauna extinction is particularly fierce, with proponents of the blitzkrieg human hunting theory clashing with those who cite extreme climate aridification as the primary cause. One side argues that the newly arrived, skilled human hunters swept across the continent, wiping out a naive fauna that had never seen a predator like them. The other side points to evidence of devastating continent-wide droughts that turned forests into deserts, starving the giants into oblivion. The truth is likely a tragic combination of the two. You stand on the edge of the Nullarbor Plain, now a vast and treeless limestone expanse. But in the Ice Age, this was a wooded savanna, a lost world teeming with giants. The evidence of that world is hidden beneath your feet. The plain is riddled with caves and sinkholes, natural traps that have collected and preserved the bones of the creatures that lived here, creating fossil treasure troves that offer a ghostly snapshot of this vanished ecosystem. You are about to enter a land of giants, but they are not the giants you know. Prepare to meet the marsupial megafauna. You step into the wooded savanna of Ice Age Australia, and the first creature you see stops you in your tracks. It is, without a doubt, the largest marsupial that has ever lived. Ambling through the eucalyptus trees is a Diprotodon optatum, an animal best described as a wombat scaled up to the size of a rhinoceros. It is a beast of immense bulk, weighing up to 2.5 tons, with a heavy, large-bellied body and pillar-like legs. Its oversized skull is filled with air spaces to keep it lightweight, and its two large front incisors are reminiscent of its smaller wombat cousins. As you look closer at its skull structure, you notice the nasal bones are retracted high on its face, a feature that in other animals, like tapirs and elephants, suggests the presence of a muscular snout or a short trunk. It's a tantalizing possibility that this giant carried a prehensile nose to help it grasp at foliage. You watch a small herd of them moving slowly towards a dry lake bed, a scene of impending tragedy. In places like Lake Callabonna, paleontologists have found vast fossil graveyards of Diprotodon, entire herds that seemingly got stuck in the thick mud while searching for the last drops of water during a brutal drought. These finds are poignant, but they also provide a crucial clue about their lives. Scientists still argue about the social structure of Diprotodon. Were they solitary like modern wombats, or did these fossil graveyards mean they lived and died together in large, socially complex herds? Your attention is then pulled towards a sound of movement in the trees, and you see a creature that defies your very definition of a kangaroo. Standing nearly 3 meters, or 9 feet, tall is a Procoptodon gollia, the giant short-faced kangaroo. It doesn't have the gentle, deer-like face of a modern roo. Its face is blunt, robust, and strangely shortened, with its eyes facing forward, giving it an almost primate-like appearance. Its feet are even stranger. Instead of the familiar 3-toed foot of a modern kangaroo, Procoptodon has a single massive hoof-like toe on each foot, like an evolutionary experiment between a kangaroo and a horse. Most strikingly, it isn't hopping. The evidence from fossil trackways is clear on this. Its anatomy, particularly its stiff spine and robust hips, made hopping impossible for an animal of its size. Instead, you watch it walk, striding forward bipedally like a person, a slow, powerful gait that would have carried it steadily across the landscape. Deeper in the woods, you find what might be the oddest of all the giant herbivores. This is Paleorchestes azael, often nicknamed the marsupial tapir because of a presumed trunk. But the comparison doesn't do it justice. While it may have had a tapir-like nose, its body was completely different. It was powerfully built, the size of a horse, but its most notable features were the enormous recurved claws on its hands. These were not defensive weapons. This creature was Australia's answer to the giant ground sloths of the Americas. You watch as it rears up, hooking its huge claws onto the high branches of a tree and pulling down with immense force, bringing the leaves down to its mouth. It was a high browser that literally reshaped the forest as it fed, an ecological role filled nowhere else in Australia, a perfect example of how evolution on this isolated continent found its own unique solutions to the challenges of life. A world filled with such immense herbivores must, by necessity, also have powerful predators to hunt them. But in Australia, the top predators were just as strange as their prey. You are crouched in the undergrowth when you see it. The marsupial lion, Thylacoleo carnifex. The first and most important thing to know about this animal is that it is not a lion, or even a cat. It's a member of the wombat order, a predator that evolved from placid, plant-eating ancestors. It is a supreme example of convergent evolution, a wombat that decided to become a lion. It is powerfully built, the size of a small lioness, with a thick, muscular neck and incredibly strong forelimbs. You notice it has retractable claws, a unique trait among all known marsupials, allowing it to keep them razor-sharp for gripping prey. But its true killing instruments are inside its mouth. Unlike cats, which kill with their canine teeth, Thylacoleo evolved its premolars, its cheek teeth, into a pair of enormous shearing blades, like a set of bone-crushing bolt cutters. Its canines were small and unimpressive, but these cheek teeth were the most specialized shearing teeth of any mammal that has ever lived. The direct evidence of their power is found on the bones of its victims. Fossilized skeletons of Diprotodon have been discovered with clean, deep cuts and punctures that are a perfect match for the unique dental toolkit of the marsupial lion, confirming the predator-prey relationship between these two marsupial giants. This creature's hunting style is a source of great debate. Paleontologists are divided on whether Thylacoleo was an ambush predator that dropped from trees onto its prey, a terrifying real-life drop bear, or if it was a powerful pursuit predator that stalked and overpowered its victims on the ground. Its robust skeleton suggests immense power, but not necessarily speed. It's a chilling thought, and it's perhaps no coincidence that some Aboriginal legends speak of giant carnivorous beasts that may be a faint, ancestral memory of this incredible animal. But the marsupial lion was not necessarily the king of this continent. That title likely belonged to a reptile. Slithering through the scrub is a walking nightmare, a monitor lizard of unbelievable size. This is Megalania, the largest terrestrial lizard of all time. Reaching lengths of up to 7 meters, or 23 feet, and weighing well over a ton, it was the undisputed apex predator of Ice Age Australia. It had a massive skull filled with serrated, blade-like teeth, and like its closest living relative, the Komodo dragon, many scientists believe it was venomous. A bite from Megalania would have delivered a cocktail of toxins, causing shock and preventing blood from clotting, allowing the giant lizard to simply follow its wounded prey until it collapsed. And the reptilian horrors didn't stop there. Patrolling the riverbanks is another creature that defies expectations. It looks like a crocodile, but it's walking with a high gait, its long, powerful legs holding its body well clear of the ground. This is Quincana, a terrestrial crocodile. Unlike its semi-aquatic relatives, Quincana was built to hunt on land. It had blade-like serrated teeth, similar to a tyrannosaur, designed for slicing flesh rather than gripping. It was a pursuit predator, a land shark that would have chased down its prey, a bizarre and terrifying fusion of reptile and mammalian hunting strategies. In this strange, isolated world, the top of the food chain was a battleground between a bone-crushing marsupial, a venomous lizard titan, and a crocodile that thought it was a dinosaur. The strangeness of Ice Age Australia was not limited to its mammals and reptiles. The continent was also home to a family of gigantic flightless birds, the likes of which have not been seen since. You hear a heavy, thudding footstep, and from a grove of trees emerges a bird of monumental proportions. These are the Dromornithidae, known in some Aboriginal traditions as mihirungs, and more colorfully nicknamed by paleontologists as the demon ducks of doom or thunderbirds. The name Thunderbird is wonderfully evocative, a name given by early researchers who imagined the ground must have shaken as these giants ran. The largest of them, Dromornis stertoni, stood a staggering 3 meters, or nearly 10 feet, tall and could weigh over 600 kilograms, making it one of the heaviest birds to have ever lived. At first glance, it looks like a predator. It has a massive head and a deep, immensely powerful beak that seems perfectly capable of crushing bone. For many years, scientists believed it was a fearsome carnivore, a feathered top predator that hunted the marsupial megafauna. But as more complete skeletons have been found, a more complex and confusing picture has emerged. The current consensus is that these demon ducks were, in fact, herbivores. The evidence against a predatory lifestyle is compelling. Their feet ended in hoof-like structures, not sharp talons. The internal structure of their skulls, which gives clues about their brain, suggests a large region for eyesight, but a very small one for the sense of smell, which is unusual for a predator. Furthermore, their eyes were set on the sides of their head, providing a wide field of vision to spot danger, but creating a large blind spot directly in front of them. A serious disadvantage for a hunter. This has led to one of the most interesting scholarly debates in Australian paleontology. What exactly did these giant birds eat? It's likely their massive beaks were used to shear through tough plant material, like thick branches, seed pods, or coarse vegetation that other herbivores couldn't process. They were less demon duck and more giant, feathered wood chipper. So you watch this enormous bird not as a terrifying monster, but as a peaceful, if intimidating, plant eater, a testament to how appearances in the fossil record can be deceiving. As dusk falls, you move towards a cave system near a watering hole, a place offering shelter for the night. But you are not alone. Coiled in the shadows near the entrance is another of Australia's giants. This is Wonambi cortensis, a constrictor snake over 5 meters long. This was not a python or a boa. It belonged to an ancient, extinct family of snakes called the Madtsoidae that had survived here in the isolation of Australia, long after they had vanished from the rest of the world. Wonambi was an ambush predator, perfectly adapted to this environment. It would lie in wait in the darkness of these caves, or in the murky water of the Billabong, waiting for a mid-sized kangaroo or wallaby to come for a drink. Then it would strike, seizing its prey and crushing it with its powerful coils. For the first human inhabitants of Australia, who also used these caves for shelter and these waterholes for survival, a creature like Wonambi would have been a silent, deadly, and ever-present danger. You now travel across the Pacific, leaving the strange world of marsupials behind. Your journey takes you to a continent that, on the surface feels more familiar, yet is populated by a cast of giants that rivals any other. You have arrived in Ice Age North America. As you stand on the windswept plains south of the great Laurentide ice sheet, you realize you have entered the undisputed elephant capital of the world. No other place on Earth, at any time in its history, supported such a rich diversity of proboscideans. At least 7 different species, from 3 distinct families, coexisted here, each carving out its own niche in the vast landscape. The most famous of these, of course, were the mammoths. In the far north, on the cold tundra steppe that bordered the ice, you find the iconic woolly mammoth. It is perfectly adapted to the cold, with a thick, shaggy coat, a warming layer of fat, small ears to prevent heat loss, and long, curved tusks it likely used to sweep away snow to get at the frozen grass beneath. But as you travel south into more temperate parklands and savannas, you encounter its even larger cousin, the Columbian mammoth. It was less hairy and significantly taller, one of the largest elephants to have ever lived. On the Channel Islands off the coast of California, you'd find a strange miniature version, the pygmy mammoth, a classic example of insular dwarfism, where a large species becomes smaller over generations when isolated in a resource-limited environment like an island. Grazing in the woodlands and swamps, you find a different kind of elephant relative altogether. This is the American mastodon. It's not a mammoth. You can see the difference immediately. It is shorter, stockier, and more robustly built, with a flatter lower skull. The most crucial difference is in its teeth. While mammoths had flat, ridged molars for grinding tough grasses, the mastodon had blunt, cone-shaped cusps on its teeth. These were the teeth of a browser, designed for crushing twigs, leaves, and shrubs. This dietary difference is the key to how they both thrived. Mammoths were the lawn mowers of the plains, while mastodons were the hedge trimmers of the forests. The scientific proof of this is found in the most humble of fossils, their dung. Preserved mastodon coprolites contain the undigested remnants of spruce twigs and other woodland plants, a definitive record of their last meal. Even stranger were the last survivors of an ancient and bizarre family, the Gomphotheres. These creatures had 4 tusks, 2 on the top and 2 protruding from an elongated lower jaw. Some species had shovel-like lower tusks for digging up aquatic plants from wetlands, while others had spiraling tusks of unknown function. They were the weird, experimental cousins in the elephant family tree. The continent was filled with the evidence of their lives and dramatic deaths. In places like Waco, Texas, paleontologists have unearthed mammoth graveyards, the remains of entire nursery herds that were suddenly killed and buried by a catastrophic flood, a snapshot of a single tragic moment in deep time. It was into this world, a world dominated by these magnificent giants, that the first humans arrived from Asia. Historians still argue whether these earliest human hunters, known as the Clovis people, were mammoth specialists who built their culture around hunting these beasts, or if they were opportunistic generalists who took whatever prey they could find. Either way, the relationship between your ancestors and these giants would forever change the face of this continent. You move away from the forested swamps of the mastodons and out into the heart of the continent. Here, the cooler, drier climate of the Ice Age has pushed the forests back, creating a vast, open landscape of grass and sky that stretches for thousands of miles. This was North America's Serengeti, an immense grassland that supported a density and diversity of large grazing animals that is almost impossible to comprehend today. Before you, a living sea of brown fur shimmers under the sun, a herd of bison, but with a startling variety. Mixed in with ancestors of the modern plains, bison are the larger steppe bison, which had crossed over the Bering Land Bridge from Asia. And towering over them all is the spectacular long-horned bison, Bison latifrons. This was the largest bison of all time, with a straight horn core that supported a horn span of over 2 meters or 7 feet, from tip to tip. It was a walking spectacle, a creature whose presence alone would have commanded respect from any predator. Even more numerous than the bison were the horses. This may come as a surprise, as we often think of horses as old-world animals brought over by the Spanish. But North America was the evolutionary cradle of the horse, its ancestral home. During the Ice Age, it was a horse heaven, with perhaps as many as 16 different native species roaming the continent. They ranged in size from small, fleet-footed creatures to the truly massive Equus giganteus, a beast that stood taller at the shoulder than most modern horses are at the head. For millions of years, this was their kingdom. And the surprises don't end there. In the distance, you might see a herd of tall, lanky animals moving with a familiar gait. These are camels. Yes, camels, like camelops, were a common sight on the plains of Ice Age North America. And flitting at the edges of the great herds are diverse relatives of the pronghorn antelope. You watch a modern pronghorn as it explodes in a burst of speed, running as if its life depends on it, even when no predator is in sight. It runs as if it's being chased by a ghost. And in a way, it is. The pronghorn's incredible speed, far faster than any living North American predator, is a deeply ingrained evolutionary memory of the animal that used to hunt it. The extinct American cheetah. How could so many large grazers coexist? The proof of their success is etched in microscopic detail on their fossilized teeth. Scientific analysis of the wear patterns on their enamel reveals how they divided up the landscape's resources. The bison teeth show long, parallel scratches, the signature of a diet of tough, silica-rich grasses. The horse teeth, however, show a more varied pattern of pits and scratches, indicating a mixed diet of both grass and softer leafy vegetation. They thrived because they weren't all eating exactly the same thing. But this golden age was not to last. The reason for the extinction of horses in their native North America remains one of the Pleistocene's greatest mysteries. They survived millions of years of climate shifts, predators, and competition, only to vanish from the land that gave them birth, just as the ice retreated. Whether it was due to a novel disease, human hunting pressure, or a subtle change in the vegetation, no single theory has been universally accepted. The cast of characters on the North American plains wasn't just shaped by arrivals from the north across the Bering Land Bridge. For millions of years, North and South America had been island continents, separated by a deep ocean channel. But then, due to volcanic activity and shifting tectonic plates, the Isthmus of Panama rose from the sea, connecting the two long-separated worlds. This triggered one of the greatest biological events in the planet's history, the Great American Biotic Interchange. Animals began to flow in both directions, and a host of strange, uniquely southern creatures marched north. Suddenly, you see an animal that seems utterly out of place among the horses and bison. It's a sloth, but it is the size of an elephant. This is Eremotherium, one of the largest ground sloths to enter North America. It moves with a slow, ponderous gait, its immense weight supported by powerful hind legs and a thick, muscular tail that acts as a third leg in a tripod. You watch as it rears up to its full height, reaching an incredible 6 meters or 20 feet into the branches of a tree. Its long arms end in enormous curved claws, which it uses not for fighting, but as giant hooks to pull down high branches, bringing a leafy meal within reach of its long tongue. They were the ultimate high browsers, shaping the very structure of the forests they lived in. The proof of their diet is undeniable, found in the form of fossilized dung balls, or coprolites, which are filled with the perfectly preserved leaves and twigs from the tops of trees, far beyond the reach of any other herbivore. In some dry caves in the American Southwest, paleontologists have found something even more incredible than fossilized bones or dung. They have discovered the mummified remains of their smaller sloth cousins, with leathery skin and coarse reddish hair still attached, a direct, tangible connection to these long-vanished giants. Following in the footsteps of the sloths were the armored invaders. First, you see the glyptodonts, like Glyptotherium. These were giant relatives of the armadillo, but they were built like living tanks. The size of a small Volkswagen Beetle, their bodies were protected by a single, solid, dome-like shell made of fused plates of bone called osteoderms. They were walking fortresses, impervious to almost any predator. Alongside them were the Pampathares, the other family of giant armadillos. They were also heavily armored, but their armor was different, composed of overlapping, flexible bands, more like a modern armadillo, which would have given them greater mobility. The arrival of these southern giants coincided with the arrival of the first humans, creating new and dramatic encounters. The evidence of this interaction is mysterious and controversial. In the clear, spring-fed rivers of Florida, archaeologists have explored deep underwater sinkholes like the Page-Ladson site. On the bottom, they have found the bones of mastodons and ground sloths, some with what appear to be cut marks from human tools alongside the tools themselves. This has led to a fascinating scholarly debate. Are these sinkholes simply natural traps where animals and artifacts accumulated over time, or were they active hunting sites where our ancestors ambushed and butchered these southern giants at their only source of fresh water? The ghostly silence of the underwater site holds its secrets close. With a continent teeming with such a rich buffet of herbivores, from giant sloths to herds of horses and bison, it is no surprise that North America was also home to an equally impressive and terrifying guild of cats. You are now in a world ruled by some of the most powerful felines ever to walk the earth. The name itself is legendary: Smilodon fatalis, the saber-toothed cat. The image of this creature, with its enormous dagger-like canines, is burned into our collective consciousness. But the popular image you might have of a solitary, tiger-like animal is likely wrong. Firstly, it wasn't a tiger. It belonged to a completely separate and now extinct lineage of cats. Secondly, it was a powerfully built ambush predator with a muscular neck, a short, bobbing tail, and immensely strong forelimbs designed to pin down struggling prey, not for a long-distance chase. Its famous sabers were surprisingly fragile and not suited for stabbing into the bone of a thrashing animal. Instead, once the prey was subdued, Smilodon would deliver a final, precise shearing bite to the soft throat, causing rapid blood loss. The most compelling evidence for its lifestyle comes from a bubbling black trap in the heart of modern-day Los Angeles, the La Brea tar pits. For tens of thousands of years, animals would get stuck in the sticky asphalt, and their cries would attract predators, who would then get stuck themselves. The pits have yielded thousands of Smilodon fossils, and many of them show evidence of severe but healed injuries. like broken legs or crushed pelvises. A solitary hunter with such a debilitating injury would starve. The fact that so many survived suggests they lived in social groups, like lions, that would protect and share food with their injured members. But Smilodon was not the only saber-tooth on the block. You also see the scimitar cat, Homotherium. It was a different kind of killer. It was more lightly built, with a sloping hyena-like back and long front legs. Its canines were shorter, broader, and serrated like steak knives. It was a runner, built for chasing down prey over long distances in open country. There were also true cats, like the American lion, Panthera atrox. It was one of the largest felines of all time, about 25% larger than a modern African lion, a supreme predator of the open plains. And keeping the pronghorn herds on their toes was the American cheetah, Miracinonyx. Interestingly, it wasn't a true cheetah, but a close relative of the modern puma that had evolved a similar long-legged, slender body for high-speed pursuit. A perfect example of convergent evolution. Just when the cast of cats seems complete, you learn of an even stranger, earlier resident. Xenosmilus, the cookie-cutter cat. This unique predator lacked the long sabers of Smilodon, and instead possessed short, broad, heavily serrated teeth, which it may have used to bite out huge chunks of flesh from its prey, causing massive trauma and blood loss. But perhaps the most charming and enduring mystery about the most famous of these cats, Smilodon, is what it sounded like. Experts still argue about its vocalizations. Based on the structure of its hyoid bones in its throat, some scientists believe it was capable of a deep, rumbling roar that would have shaken the plains. Others argue the anatomy points to a creature that could not roar, but may have purred. A deep, continuous, chesty rumble. We may never know for sure if this fearsome predator announced its presence with a terrifying roar or a deceptively gentle purr. The feline predators, for all their power, were not the only carnivores on the prowl. The plains and forests of North America were also home to powerful packs of canids, giant bears, and colossal birds of prey. You hear a familiar sound on the wind, a wolf's howl, but this one is deeper, heavier, carrying a weight the modern wolf's cry lacks. This is the howl of the dire wolf, Anotian dirus. It's important to know that the dire wolf was not the ancestor of the modern grey wolf. They were more like evolutionary cousins who competed for the same resources. The dire wolf was built like a linebacker, similarly sized to the largest grey wolves today, but far more robust and heavily muscled, with a broader head and a more powerful bite, designed for grappling with and crushing the bones of large prey. Their story is vividly told by the La Brea tar pits. While Smilodon fossils are numerous there, the remains of dire wolves are astonishingly abundant, outnumbering the saber-toothed cats by a significant margin. This quirky fact suggests something about their behavior. Perhaps they hunted in enormous packs and were more willing to risk the treacherous tar to scavenge a meal, or perhaps they were simply less cautious, their hunger overpowering their instinct. In the far north, another wolf shared the landscape, the megafaunal wolf. This was a distinct ecomorph, a specialized version of the familiar grey wolf, adapted for hunting the truly giant game of Beringia. It had a bulkier frame and an overdeveloped snout and jaw, turning its head into a more powerful weapon for taking on prey like horses and bison. But even the largest wolf pack would have given way to the true king of the carnivores on this continent. A hulking figure emerges from a tree line, a beast that could stand on its hind legs and look into the second-story window of a modern house. This is Arctodus saimus, the giant short-faced bear. It was one of the biggest land-dwelling mammalian carnivores in history, with incredibly long, slender legs and a blunt, truncated snout that gave it its name. But how this giant made its living is the subject of one of the most exciting scholarly debates in paleontology. One theory posits that it was an unstoppable super-predator, using its long legs to run down prey like horses and camels at high speeds. However, another compelling theory suggests it was the ultimate scavenger, a kleptoparasite. In this scenario, its long legs weren't for sprinting, but for tireless, efficient, long-distance trotting, allowing it to cover vast territories in search of carcasses. Its immense size and terrifying appearance would have been enough to bully any other predator, from a pack of dire wolves to a Smilodon, off their hard-earned kill. The scientific evidence is ambiguous. Chemical analysis of its bones confirms a diet extremely high in meat, but the mechanics of its skeleton are still argued over. Were its long legs built for speed or for endurance? Was it a killer or the most intimidating thief of the Ice Age? And the danger wasn't only on the ground. A massive shadow sweeps over the plains, and you look up to see a bird with a wingspan wider than a car. These are the teratons, giant birds of prey like Aulornis incredibilis, which commanded the skies. For years, scientists assumed they were simply giant vultures, soaring high and scavenging carcasses. But a closer look at their anatomy has shifted this consensus. Their beaks and skulls are not like those of vultures. The current thinking is that teratons were active predators, but they hunted on the ground, stalking and snapping up small animals and swallowing them whole. A far more terrifying prospect than a simple scavenger. Your journey now takes you south, across the narrow land bridge of Panama, and into a continent that was, for tens of millions of years, a world unto itself. Like Australia, South America spent a vast portion of its history as an island continent, a laboratory where evolution ran a completely different set of experiments. The result was a menagerie of mammals so strange they seem to have emerged from a fantasy novel. You have entered a land of the truly bizarre. The first giant you encounter is a familiar concept, but on a grander, more imposing scale. It's a ground sloth, the undisputed king of its kind, Megatherium. Even larger than its North American relatives, this was a sloth the size of a bull elephant, weighing up to 4 tons. You watch as it ambles toward a tall tree, then does something extraordinary. It rises up on its powerful hind legs, its massive, muscular tail planting firmly on the ground behind it, forming a stable, living tripod. In this posture, it can easily reach the highest, most tender leaves, pulling them in with its long tongue. It was an herbivore of immense power and unique design. But was this giant always a gentle plant eater? This is the subject of a fascinating and slightly terrifying scholarly debate. Some scientists have proposed a more sinister side to Megatherium. They argue that its anatomy, huge claws, powerful forelimbs, and surprising agility for its size, would have made it a formidable fighter. The theory suggests that Megatherium may have been an opportunistic scavenger, or even a part-time carnivore, using its immense size to simply drive predators like Smilodon off their kills, claiming the fresh meat for itself. The image of a giant sloth bullying a pack of saber-toothed cats is a startling one, and it reminds us that the lives of these animals were likely far more complex than we can imagine. Crawling nearby is a living fortress, a creature that seems to have perfected the art of defense. This is Glyptodon. A relative of the armadillo, it was the size of a small car, protected by a rigid, dome-like shell over a centimeter thick. It was a walking citadel, virtually immune to attack from above, and it wasn't passive in its defense. It carried a weapon, a long, armored tail that, in many species, ended in a brutal, spiked club. It was the mammalian version of an ankylosaur, a slow-moving herbivore that packed a devastating punch. The evidence of these giants isn't just in their bones, but scarred into the landscape itself. Across South America, geologists have discovered vast, ancient tunnel systems, some over 2 meters high and hundreds of meters long. These are paleo-burrows, and they are so large that they could only have been dug by the megafauna, most likely giant sloths or armadillos seeking shelter. Perhaps the most charming and quirky piece of speculation about these armored beasts is how the first humans may have interacted with them. It's been suggested that early human settlers, upon finding an empty Glyptodon shell, may have used them as ready-made armored shelters, a prehistoric organic version of a tent, protecting them from the elements and the predators of this strange and wonderful land. The giants like Megatherium and Glyptodon were certainly the most imposing of South America's native fauna, but they were not the most unusual. For tens of millions of years, the familiar roles of hoofed mammals, the grazers and browsers like horses, camels, and rhinos, were filled by a completely different and now entirely extinct cast of characters. These were the uniquely South American orders of ungulates, the Litopterna and the Notungulata. They were the result of evolution running its course on an isolated continent, a separate path that produced creatures of extraordinary and bizarre design. Perhaps the strangest of them all, and the poster child for this lost world, was Macrauchenia. At first glance, you might think it's a kind of camel without a hump, with a long neck and slender legs. But then you notice its feet, which are more like those of a rhinoceros. The real mystery, however, is its head. The nasal opening in its skull isn't at the front of the snout where a nose should be. It's set high up on its forehead, between its eyes. This bizarre anatomy completely baffled the first scientist to study its fossils. A young Charles Darwin, who discovered the remains during his voyage on the Beagle. He couldn't imagine what kind of creature it belonged to. This strange placement of the nostrils has sparked a long-running scholarly debate about what the face of Macrauchenia actually looked like. The most common theory is that it supported a short, muscular trunk, like that of a tapir, which it used to grasp leaves and other vegetation. Another idea suggests the animal was semi-aquatic, and the high nasal opening acted as a snorkel, allowing it to breathe while submerged. A third possibility is that it had a large, fleshy, inflatable nose, similar to the modern saiga antelope, to help it warm and moisten the cold, dry air of the Patagonian plains. We may never know for sure, but it was undoubtedly a creature of singular appearance. Just as strange was the massive Toxodon, a powerful notungulate the size of a black rhino. Darwin, who also discovered its fossils, famously described it as one of the strangest animals ever discovered. It was a puzzle of an animal, a biological chimera. It had the heavy, barrel-shaped body of a rhinoceros, the broad head and high-set eyes of a hippopotamus, and continuously growing incisors like those of a rodent. The name Toxodon is a quirky detail that comes from its teeth, meaning bow tooth, in reference to their curved shape. It was a powerful grazer, likely spending much of its time in and around water, much like a hippo. These creatures, Macrauchenia and Toxodon, represent a ghost lineage, a separate path that evolution took for millions of years, producing a world of might-have-beens that thrived in isolation until the land bridge to the north opened, forever changing the fate of their entire continent. The great American biotic interchange was a two-way street. While the strange and wonderful herbivores of the south ventured north, a wave of deadly and highly efficient predators began to pour south, entering a world that was not prepared for them. For millions of years, South America's food web had its own internal balance. Now, that balance was about to be shattered. Out of the north came a new kind of killer, an apex predator at the peak of its evolutionary power. This was Smilodon populator, the South American saber-toothed cat. It was the heavyweight champion of its famous genus, even larger and more powerfully built than its North American cousin. With massive chest and forelimbs, it was an ambush predator, perfectly designed to hunt the large and perhaps slower-moving native ungulates like Toxodon and Macrauchenia. The native fauna had never faced a cat with such a specialized and lethal killing method. And it did not come alone. The giant short-faced bears like Arctotherium also made the journey south. In this new continent, rich with prey and with a different set of competitors, they evolved into some of the largest and most formidable bears to have ever lived, becoming another dominant predator on the landscape. For thousands of years, these new arrivals asserted their dominance, creating a new, dynamic, and violent ecosystem. But the most dangerous predator of all, the one that would change everything, arrived last. Around 14,000 years ago, your ancestors, the skilled hunter-gatherers known as the Clovis people, made their way down the continent. They were armed with sophisticated stone tools, cooperative hunting strategies, and a brain capable of solving problems in ways no other animal could. And soon after they arrived, the giants began to disappear. In a geological heartbeat, all South American mammals larger than 100 kilograms, larger than a capybara, vanished forever. Why? This is one of the most hotly debated topics in paleontology. Many scientists support the overkill hypothesis, arguing that these early humans were super predators who swept through a continent of naive fauna that had no evolved fear of humans, hunting them to extinction. The direct scientific evidence for hunting is undeniable. Archaeologists have found the fossilized bones of Megatherium and Glyptodon with the clear, unambiguous cut marks from human stone tools. Other scientists, however, point to the dramatic and erratic climate shifts at the end of the Ice Age, arguing that habitat loss and environmental stress were the primary killers. After all, many of these animal species had survived previous ice ages, but the swings in temperature at the end of this last one were particularly severe. In all likelihood, it wasn't one cause, but a deadly cocktail. The giant fauna, already stressed and fragmented by a rapidly changing climate, were pushed over the edge by the arrival of a new, incredibly intelligent and adaptable predator. Amidst the ghosts of these vanished giants, a humble and quirky survivor remains. The capybara, the world's largest living rodent, still wanders the wetlands of South America, a small, unassuming relic from a lost age of monsters. We leave the Americas and their dramatic story of invasion and extinction behind, and our journey takes us now to a vast subcontinent that played by its own rules during the Pleistocene. You have arrived in Ice Age India, a land that tells a very different story, not of loss, but of remarkable persistence. Here there are no vast, continent-crushing ice sheets. Due to its latitude, the region was far too warm for glaciation, but that does not mean it was untouched by the planet's frozen state. The climate of the Ice Age exerted its influence here in a different way, by controlling the power of the single most important weather phenomenon in this part of the world: the summer monsoon. During the cold, glacial periods, The weakened temperature difference between the land and sea caused the monsoons to become less intense, leading to a drier, more arid climate. During the warmer interglacial periods, the opposite was true, and the subcontinent experienced far more intense monsoons and a wetter climate. The scientific evidence for this planetary pulse is written in the mud and silt of ancient riverbeds. Sediment cores drilled from these areas show distinct, alternating layers. Thick, coarse grains deposited by powerful, flooding rivers during the wet periods, and thin, fine grains left by weaker rivers during the dry spells. This rhythm of wet and dry certainly shaped life here, but it did so without the catastrophic impact seen elsewhere. This relative climatic stability led to a startling and unique outcome. India did not experience a massive end Pleistocene extinction event. Unlike in Europe, Australia, and the Americas, most of the megafauna that lived here 200,000 years ago still survive in some form today. The ghosts of the Ice Age are not entirely ghosts here. You can see their direct descendants in the forms of Asian elephants, Indian rhinoceroses, taisi, and water buffalo. This raises one of the biggest questions of the era. Why? Why did India's giants survive when so many others perished? This is a major topic of scholarly debate. One theory suggests that the climate, while variable, was simply more stable overall, without the extreme ecosystem-shattering shifts seen in other regions. Another powerful theory points to a much longer history of coevolution. The fauna of India had hundreds of thousands of years to adapt to the presence of technologically advancing hominids, from Homo erectus onwards. Unlike in the Americas, where your ancestors were a sudden, shocking new threat, the animals here had a long time to learn that bipedal apes with sharp stones were dangerous. And make no mistake, the giants here were truly colossal. You stand in a forest clearing and look up at a creature that redefines your understanding of size. This is Paleoloxodon namadicus, the Asian straight-tusked elephant. Meet what is very likely the largest land mammal of all time. Standing over 5 meters, or 16.5 feet, tall at the shoulder and weighing an estimated 22 tons, it would have dwarfed a woolly mammoth. Even the familiar animals that walk this land today have surprising family ties that stretch back into this era. In a quirky twist of genetics, the living Asian elephant is actually more closely related to the extinct woolly mammoth than it is to the living African elephant, a reminder that the family trees of these ancient beasts are full of surprises. The colossal Paleoloxodon was not the only giant proboscidean sharing the forests and grasslands of the Indian subcontinent. You would have also frequently encountered another, equally impressive relative of the elephant, the stegodon. Its most remarkable and defining feature was its tusks. They were enormously long, but in many species they grew so close together and parallel to each other that there was very little space for the animal's trunk to lie in between. Stegodon was also an excellent swimmer, an ability that allowed it to colonize numerous islands across Asia, from the Philippines to Japan. This island hopping led to a fascinating evolutionary phenomenon. On the isolated island of Flores in Indonesia, a population of stegodon became progressively smaller over many generations, a process known as insular dwarfism. This dwarf stegodon was no larger than a water buffalo, and it shared its strange, isolated world with another dwarfed creature, our own ancient relative, Homo floresiensis, nicknamed the Hobbit. But the plains were also home to herbivores from a completely different branch of the evolutionary tree. You see a creature that looks like it was assembled by a committee. Imagine an animal that is part giraffe, part moose, and part ox. This was Sevatherium, a giant, extinct relative of the giraffe. It was far more heavily built than its modern cousin, with a robust, moose-like body. Its head was its most spectacular feature, adorned with 2 pairs of ossicones, the skin-covered bony structures unique to giraffes. It had a wide, antler-like pair on top of its head, and a second, smaller, sharper pair above its eyes. It was a strange and imposing browser, a truly unique experiment in ungulate design. Where there are herbivores, there must be carnivores to hunt them, and Ice Age India had one of the most formidable bone crackers of all time. Lurking near a kill site is Pachycrocuta brevirostris, the giant, short-faced hyena. This was the largest hyena that has ever existed, standing 1 meter tall at the shoulder and weighing as much as a lioness. But it was a different kind of hyena from the ones we know today. The modern spotted hyena is a nimble pack hunter that often kills its own food. Pachycrocuta, by contrast, was a heavily set animal not built for long chases. It was a specialist scavenger, a bone-crushing brute that likely used its sheer size and power to drive other predators, like saber-toothed cats, away from their kills. The scientific evidence for its lifestyle is powerfully written in its skull. Its massive jaw muscles and thick, robust teeth were perfectly adapted for osteophagy, the act of consuming bone. Finally, you might catch a glimpse of a familiar pattern in a flash of gold. A cheetah, but one as large and heavy as an African lioness. This was the giant cheetah, Acinonyx pardonensis. This has led to a fun and quirky debate among paleontologists that continues to this day. Was the giant cheetah faster than its modern, smaller counterpart? Some argue that its longer legs and presumably larger heart and lungs would have made it even faster. Others contend that its much greater body weight would have slowed it down, making it less agile. We may never know for sure who would win that race, another lost secret of this Ice Age haven. Our journey now leads us west, from the subcontinent of persistence into a land defined by rapid, violent, and relentless change. You have arrived in Ice Age Europe. It is crucial that you forget any image you might have of a quiet, empty, frozen wasteland. The reality was far more dynamic and teeming with life. Before you lies the western edge of the Great Mammoth Steppe, an ecosystem so vast and rich that it's often called the Ice Age Serengeti. This was a lost world, an environment that doesn't exist anywhere on Earth today. It was not like the modern Arctic tundra, which is often wet, boggy, and covered in low nutrient mosses and lichens. Nor was it like the modern steppe of Central Asia, which can be arid and sparse. The Mammoth Steppe was a unique biome, a vast, cold, and dry grassland. Because of the low moisture, there were few forests, and the cold prevented the growth of the boggy vegetation you see in the Arctic now. Instead, the landscape was dominated by highly nutritious grasses, herbs, and sedges that could thrive in the long, cold winters and brief, sunny summers. This unique and productive environment created a bizarre and wonderful melting pot of animals, a gathering of creatures that our modern world keeps separated by thousands of miles. You watch as a herd of Arctic reindeer, animals you'd associate with the polar north, graze peacefully on a hillside. Not far from them is a herd of shaggy musk oxen, their thick coats protecting them from the biting wind. But then you see a pack of predators stalking them, and they are not Arctic wolves. They are spotted hyenas, animals you would expect to see on the plains of Africa. A deep, rumbling roar echoes from a nearby cliff face. the call of a cave lion, another creature whose relatives now live in warmer climates. This was the defining feature of the European Ice Age, a unique ecosystem where the fauna of the north and the south mingled in a way that is impossible today. And onto this dramatic stage walked two different kinds of humans. For hundreds of thousands of years, Europe had been the domain of the Neanderthals, a hardy and intelligent human species perfectly adapted to the continent's harsh cycles of cold. But now, new arrivals were making their way from the east. Your direct ancestors, the Cro-Magnons, or Homo sapiens. For a few thousand years, these two human species would share this landscape, competing for the same caves, the same prey, and the same resources in a drama whose final act would leave only one of them standing. The life of every single creature here, from the smallest lemming to the largest mammoth, was governed by a climate that was perpetually on a knife's edge. The scientific evidence for this comes from one of the most remarkable records of Earth's history, the ice cores drilled from deep within the Greenland ice sheet. These cores show that the European climate could flip from relatively mild to full glacial cold with terrifying speed, sometimes in the space of a single decade. The sheer biomass of life this unstable world supported is staggering. It's a quirky but powerful thought that the total weight of animals on the Mammoth steppe may have been comparable to that of the modern African Serengeti. So why did this incredibly vibrant world vanish so completely? This is a huge scholarly debate among ecologists. Was it the climate? As the Ice Age ended, the world became warmer and wetter, allowing dense forests and boggy tundra to advance, choking out the grasslands. Or was it the extinction of the mega herbivores themselves? Some argue that the constant grazing and trampling by millions of mammoths, rhinos, and bison was what maintained the grasslands, and once they were gone, the ecosystem inevitably collapsed. In the harsh, wind-swept world of Ice Age Europe, shelter was everything. The ultimate prize for any creature, human or animal, was a deep, dry cave that offered a refuge from the bone-chilling winds and the prowling predators of the night. But these prime locations were often already occupied, sometimes by a beast of such immense proportions that it seemed to be a living spirit of the mountain itself. You peer into the darkness of a cavern, and two eyes glint back, belonging to a creature larger than any modern European brown bear, rivaling even the great grizzlies of Alaska. This is Ursus spelaeus, the cave bear. You would expect such a creature, with its massive head and powerful body, to be the undisputed apex predator of the continent. But the cave bear held a secret, a paradox that has fascinated scientists for over a century. Despite its fearsome appearance, it was overwhelmingly vegetarian. We know this not from guesswork, but from the chemistry locked deep within its fossilized bones. Scientific evidence from isotopic analysis, which measures the chemical signatures of an animal's diet, shows a profile overwhelmingly dominated by plants. It was a gentle giant, a massive herbivore that likely spent its waking months fattening up on roots, berries, and grasses. Its name is no accident. The cave was its life. These bears relied on deep, protected cave systems to survive the brutal winters in hibernation. They would enter the caves in autumn to sleep, but many, especially the young, old, or weak, would never wake up, dying peacefully in their slumber. They did this for so many thousands of generations that their bones accumulated in staggering numbers, in some caves forming dense, thick layers carpeting the floor. These incredible bone beds are a natural archive of the species, but to early miners and naturalists, they were a source of myth. It's a quirky and understandable fact that for centuries, the immense fossil bones of cave bears were often mistaken for the remains of dragons or fallen biblical giants. But the bears were not the only ones who coveted these shelters. You might find another cave, its entrance littered with gnawed and splintered bones. This is the den of the cave hyena, a larger and more robust subspecies of the modern spotted hyena. These were not gentle giants. They were powerful, intelligent pack hunters that preyed on the great herbivores of the steppe, from wild horses to the formidable woolly rhino. They used caves as communal dens, a safe place to raise cubs and drag back the carcasses of their kills. The floors of their dens tell a different story from the bears' caves. Not a story of peaceful death in sleep, but a chaotic library of their hunts, with the bones of countless different species bearing the distinctive marks of hyena teeth. So what happened to the great cave bear? Why did this massively successful animal, which had dominated the continent for so long, vanish completely? This is the subject of a significant scholarly debate. One theory points the finger at your ancestors. As modern humans spread across Europe, they needed the same prime cave sites for shelter, and they would have competed directly with the bears, likely driving them from the best hibernation spots. Another theory suggests the bear's highly specialized vegetarian diet was its undoing. As the climate flipped rapidly at the end of the Ice Age, the specific plants the bears relied on may have disappeared, leaving the giants to starve. It was likely a fatal combination of losing their homes and their food at the same time. Out on the vast, open plains of the Mammoth steppe, beyond the shelter of the caves, grazed the great herds that formed the foundation of the entire ecosystem. You now stand in the midst of these magnificent herbivores, creatures perfectly adapted to the challenges of this cold and wind-swept world. The first animal you see is an icon of the Ice Age, a silhouette as famous as the mammoth itself. It is the woolly rhino, Coelodonta antiquitatis. Built like a living battering ram, it was shorter and stockier than modern rhinos, covered in a thick, reddish-brown coat of shaggy fur. But its most remarkable tool was its front horn. Unlike the pointed, conical horns of African rhinos, the woolly rhino's was a massive, flattened blade of keratin, sometimes over a meter long. For a long time, its function was a mystery, but the consensus now is that this incredible horn was its personal snowplow. You watch as it swings its great head from side to side, sweeping away drifts of snow to uncover the frozen grasses and sedges buried beneath. We know their appearance in such intimate detail, not just from cave paintings, but from the incredible scientific evidence of entire mummified carcasses found frozen in the Siberian permafrost, perfectly preserved with their hair, horns, and even last meals still intact. Next, you witness an animal of breathtaking grace and scale, a creature that seems to belong more to mythology than to history. This is Megaloceros giganteus, the giant deer. It's often called the Irish elk, a common misnomer, as it was not a true elk and was found right across Eurasia. Your eyes are drawn irresistibly to its crown, the largest and most magnificent set of antlers ever produced by any deer species. Spanning up to 3.6 meters, or 12 feet, from tip to tip, and weighing over 40 kilograms, this colossal rack was a masterpiece of biological engineering. These incredible structures are the heart of a long-standing scholarly debate. Were they primarily weapons for fighting other males for dominance, or were they purely for display, a signal of genetic fitness to attract females? This leads to a more tragic question. Did they become a form of maladaptation? Growing such huge antlers each year required an immense amount of energy and minerals. Some scientists argue that as the climate changed and the nutrient-rich vegetation of the steppe disappeared, the deer could no longer support the metabolic cost of their own grandeur. They became a symbol of power that may have become a fatal evolutionary burden. Grazing alongside them is a more familiar shape, but it is larger, wilder, and more powerful than any bovine you have ever seen. This is the aurochs, Bos primigenius, the great-great-grandfather of every single domestic cow on the planet today. Standing nearly 2 meters tall at the shoulder, the bulls were massive, with long, athletic legs and formidable forward-curving horns. Ancient Roman writers described them as incredibly aggressive and untamably wild. This was no gentle farm animal. This was a beast that could stand its ground against a pack of wolves or a cave lion. The story of the aurochs has a uniquely sad and certain ending, a quirky and poignant fact that separates it from its prehistoric brethren. It survived the end of the Ice Age, but its numbers dwindled due to habitat loss and hunting. The last known aurochs, a female, died in the Jaktorów forest in Poland in the year 1627. Its death was recorded. It is a rare and haunting bridge between the deep time of the Ice Age and our own recorded history, a final documented farewell to one of Europe's great herbivores. The great herds of rhino, deer, and aurochs did not graze in peace, for the plains and forests of Ice Age Europe were the hunting grounds of some of the world's most powerful and intelligent predators. The undisputed king of this domain was Panthera spelaea, the cave lion. This was a colossal cat, significantly larger and heavier than the modern African lion, and it was the apex predator of the Mammoth steppe. For a long time, scientists could only guess at its appearance based on its bones. But we know one remarkable, intimate detail about this animal thanks to the incredible artistry of our own ancestors. The male cave lion had no mane. The scientific evidence for this comes not from a fossil, but from a prehistoric art gallery. Deep within the Chauvet cave in France, our relatives, with breathtaking skill and accuracy, painted these lions on the cave walls over 30,000 years ago. The images are vivid and unambiguous, showing prides of sleek, powerful, maneless lions on the hunt. The lion was not the only great cat to stalk this landscape. In the more wooded regions and rocky hillsides, you would have also found the European jaguar and the Ice Age leopard. These were ancient subspecies of the cats we know today, beautifully adapted to the colder conditions, a reminder of the incredible diversity of predators this rich ecosystem could support. Matching the cats in intelligence and endurance were the great wolf packs of the Pleistocene. The dominant form during the coldest periods was the European cave wolf, a large, robust ecomorph of the grey wolf with powerful jaws, built for tackling the megafauna of the steppe. The fossil record tells a fascinating story of evolution in action. As the Ice Age ended and the giant prey animals disappeared, this large wolf form was replaced by a smaller, more slender type of wolf that hunted the remaining reindeer. And when the reindeer too moved north, that wolf was in turn replaced by the modern European wolf that we know today. The relationship between your ancestors and these wolves was deeply complex. They were rivals, two intelligent social predators competing for the exact same prey. But a quirky and world-altering thing happened during this period of intense competition. A revolutionary truce was called. Some wolves began to associate with human camps, perhaps drawn to the safety of the fire or the scraps of food. Over generations, this association deepened, and humans began to selectively breed the most cooperative of these animals. It was here, in the cold crucible of the Ice Age, that a rival was transformed into our greatest animal ally, the domestic dog. The most intimate connection we have to this lost world and its creatures are the paintings they left behind on the silent walls of caves. The images of lions, rhinos, and giant deer are so vivid you can almost hear them breathe. But why did our ancestors create them? This is a scholarly debate that touches the very heart of what it means to be human. Were they simply art for art's sake? A celebration of the beauty of the world around them? Were they part of a shamanistic ritual, a form of hunting magic meant to capture the spirit of the animal and ensure a successful hunt? Or were they a kind of textbook, a way of recording information about different species and hunting techniques, passing crucial knowledge from one generation to the next? The artists are long gone, and the caves keep their secrets. Our journey continues eastward, leaving the painted caves and valleys of Europe behind. As you travel, however, the landscape remains remarkably the same. The sky is vast, the wind is cold, and the world is a sea of grass. You are still on the Mammoth Steppe. This was arguably the largest single ecosystem on Earth during the Ice Age, a continuous ribbon of cold, dry grassland that stretched for 10,000 kilometers from the coast of France, across the entire breadth of Asia, over the Bering Land Bridge, and deep into North America. And this vast, unbroken empire was the domain of one animal above all others, the creature for which it is named. You are now in the heartland of the woolly mammoth, Mammothus primigenius. It is a site of profound prehistoric majesty. You see a family group moving slowly across the plain. Their dark, shaggy coats a mix of coarse outer hair and a fine, dense underwool for insulation. Beneath their skin lies a thick layer of fat, another defense against the relentless cold. You notice their small, fur-lined ears and short tails, elegant adaptations to minimize heat loss. Their famous silhouette is created by a high, domed head and a distinctive sloping back. Their magnificent, curving tusks, sometimes over 4 meters long, were versatile tools used for defense against predators, for social display, and as personal snowplows to sweep aside snow and uncover the frozen vegetation that was their lifeblood. We know the mammoth with an intimacy that is almost impossible for any other prehistoric creature. The reason is the Siberian permafrost, a vast natural freezer that has preserved not just their bones, but their entire bodies in a state of near-perfect preservation. The scientific evidence these mummies provide is breathtaking. You could be standing next to Lyuba, a baby mammoth who died 42,000 years ago and was found by a reindeer herder in 2007. She is so perfectly preserved that scientists could study her eyelashes, the developing pads on her feet, and even the milk from her mother still present in her stomach. These frozen time capsules give us a direct, tangible connection to the Ice Age that is both scientifically invaluable and deeply moving. Even the tusks of an adult mammoth tell a detailed life story. This quirky fact is a paleontologist's dream. The tusks grew continuously throughout the mammoth's life, adding new layers in a cone-in-cone structure. Much like the rings of a tree, these layers can be analyzed to reveal the animal's age, the different seasons of its life, periods of hardship or good health, and for females, the distinct chemical changes that indicate when she gave birth to a calf. Yet this incredibly successful and well-adapted animal vanished from the earth. Why? The final act of the mammoth's tragedy is a dramatic mystery that played out on a lonely island in the Arctic Ocean. While the mainland populations died out around 10,000 years ago, a small isolated group found a final refuge on what is now Wrangel Island. They survived there for another 6,000 years, a relic population living on while the pyramids were being built in Egypt. What finally killed them? This is a key scholarly debate. Was it a single catastrophic weather event, like a rain-on-snow storm that encased their food in ice? Was it a genetic meltdown, where the small inbred population finally succumbed to a fatal loss of genetic diversity? Or was it the arrival of the first humans on the island who delivered the final fatal blow to the last of the mammoths? The evidence is still being uncovered. While the mammoth was the undisputed king of the open steppe, the subtropical forests of southern Asia were home to a different kind of giant, a creature from our own branch of the family tree. In the bamboo forests of what is now southern China and Southeast Asia, you would have found the largest ape that has ever lived, Gigantopithecus. Imagine a primate that could have stood nearly 3 meters, or 10 feet, tall and weighed over 500 kilograms, more than twice the size of a modern male gorilla. Our knowledge of this incredible creature is a masterpiece of scientific deduction, as its physical remains are incredibly scarce. This is the main scientific evidence we have: a handful of massive jawbones and over 1,000 fossilized teeth. In a quirky twist of history, the very first evidence of Gigantopithecus was discovered in the 1930s by a paleontologist who found one of its giant molars being sold in a Hong Kong apothecary as a dragon's tooth. From the size and wear patterns on these teeth, scientists have pieced together a picture of a colossal, ground-dwelling herbivore, a specialist that likely spent its days peacefully munching on vast quantities of fibrous vegetation, most probably bamboo. So why did the largest ape of all time vanish, while smaller, more adaptable primates like our own ancestors thrived? This is a key scholarly debate. The leading theory is that Gigantopithecus was an extreme specialist. Its immense size required a huge, reliable source of food, and it was perfectly adapted to the bamboo forests of its time. But as the climate shifted at the end of the Pleistocene, these forests began to contract and change. The giant ape, with its slow reproductive rate and massive dietary needs, was simply too big and too specialized to adapt. It was an evolutionary dead end, a giant that was too successful in its own world to survive the transition to a new one. But as one giant faded into extinction, a revolutionary new partnership was being forged across the colder regions of the continent, a partnership that would change the course of human history. You see a human hunting camp at the edge of the steppe, and at a respectful distance, a pack of wolves is watching. For thousands of years, humans and wolves were competitors. But sometime during this period, a bond began to form. Perhaps the less fearful wolves learned that scavenging from human kills was easier than hunting themselves. In turn, humans may have realized that the wolves' superior senses of smell and hearing could act as an invaluable early warning system against predators or rival tribes. This was the beginning of the domestication of the dog, a gradual taming of a rival into a partner, an alliance that would allow your ancestors to hunt more effectively and spread more confidently across the globe. While the story of the dog is one of partnership, the Siberian permafrost has given us another, incredibly intimate glimpse into the lives of Asia's predators. In recent years, researchers have pulled several perfectly preserved cave lion cubs from the melting ice. One of them, a female cub nicknamed Sparta, is so immaculate that she looks as if she simply fell asleep. This isn't a fossil. It's a 28,000-year-old baby animal with its soft golden fur, its delicate whiskers, and its tiny paws all intact. It is a fragile, breathtaking messenger from the Ice Age, a frozen kitten that connects us directly to the wildness and wonder of its lost world. The story of the Asian Ice Age, particularly in its vast southeastern regions, is a story of dramatic and often violent environmental change. It was a world on a switch, constantly flipping between two entirely different states. The scientific evidence for this comes from the microscopic world. Pollen grains preserved in layers of sediment from lake beds and seabeds provide a clear, continuous record of the changing vegetation. During the long, cold, and dry glacial periods, the life-giving monsoons weakened. The dense tropical forests retreated into small, isolated pockets, and vast grasslands and open savannas expanded in their place. This new open world was a paradise for grazing animals. Giant water buffalo, bovids, and the last of the stegodons thrived. It was also the world of grassland specialists like the giant hyenas and our own ancient relative Homo erectus. Their populations exploded, spreading out across the newly opened landscapes. But then, as the Earth's climate began to warm at the end of the Ice Age, the switch was flipped back. The monsoons returned with a vengeance, bringing warmth and immense amounts of rain. The savannas and grasslands began to shrink, and the dense, dark rainforests reclaimed the land. For the grassland specialists, this was a catastrophe. The world that had sustained them was vanishing, being swallowed by trees. Their populations dwindled, and many, like the giant hyenas and Homo erectus, faded into extinction. But here is the paradox. When the forests returned, the original forest giants, like Gigantopithecus, did not return with them. The world they had once known was gone forever, because a new and unprecedentedly powerful force was now on the scene. Your ancestors, Homo sapiens, had arrived. Unlike previous hominids, your ancestors were the ultimate adaptable generalists. Armed with projectile weapons, complex social structures, and the mastery of fire to shape the landscape, they could thrive anywhere. They were not dependent on one type of ecosystem. The return of the forest was not a barrier to them. It was simply a new set of resources to exploit. Their migrations across this changing world were aided by a lost geography. During the periods of low sea level, much of what is now the Indonesian archipelago was a single, vast landmass called Sundaland. This quirky and fascinating lost continent connected the mainland to islands like Borneo, Java, and Sumatra, creating corridors for both animals and people to move through. As the ice caps melted and the seas rose, this continent was drowned, leaving behind the thousands of islands we see today. So, what delivered the final blow to Asia's remaining giants, like the last of the stegodons? This remains a subject of scholarly debate. Was it primarily the rapid habitat change, as their grassland world disappeared beneath an advancing tide of forest? Or was it the pressure from this new, incredibly efficient human predator who was now competing for every resource? The most likely answer is that it was a devastating 1-2 punch. The survivors of a rapidly changing climate, struggling to find food in a new forested world, now found themselves facing a predator unlike any they had ever encountered before, bringing the long reign of Asia's giants to a close. Our journey through the continents of the Ice Age is now drawing to a close, because the Ice Age itself is ending. The grand, planetary-scale forces that created this world of ice and giants are beginning to shift, and the colossal structures that defined the era are starting to fail. You are about to witness the Great Thaw, a period of climatic chaos and world-altering change. Around 19,000 years ago, the great cosmic waltz of the Earth's orbit shifted once more. The slow, predictable changes in the planet's tilt and its path around the Sun began to increase the amount of solar radiation warming the northern hemisphere. The thaw began subtly at first, a slight lengthening of the summer melt. But soon, powerful feedback loops kicked in. As the bright, reflective ice melted, it exposed the darker land and sea beneath, which absorbed more of the sun's heat, which in turn caused even more melting. The warming oceans also began to release vast quantities of dissolved carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, enhancing the greenhouse effect and accelerating the process. The planet's thermostat was turning up, and the ice sheets began to bleed. The result was a planetary-scale meltdown, and the water didn't just flow gently to the sea. It was often held back by the retreating ice sheets themselves, forming immense proglacial lakes. In North America, a lake called Agassiz grew to be larger than all the modern Great Lakes combined. Another, glacial Lake Missoula in Montana, held more water than Lake Erie and Lake Ontario put together, all trapped behind a fragile dam of ice. And then, the ice dams broke. The scientific evidence for these events is written into the landscape of Washington state in a region known as the Channeled Scablands. The catastrophic draining of Lake Missoula unleashed a flood of almost unimaginable power. A wall of water hundreds of feet high, moving at highway speeds, scoured the land down to the bare basalt bedrock, carving canyons in a matter of days and leaving behind giant ripple marks made of gravel and boulders, some of them 30 feet high. It was a flood that dwarfed any in recorded human history. Meanwhile, the meltwater pouring into the oceans caused them to rise, sometimes with terrifying speed. The great land bridges that had served as highways for migration for tens of thousands of years began to drown. Doggerland, the low-lying plain that connected Britain to Europe, was slowly inundated, its hills becoming islands before they, too, vanished beneath the waves, its memory surviving only as a vague myth of a lost land. The same fate befell Beringia, turning the wide, grassy steppe into the shallow, cold sea that now separates Asia and America. Even today, the ghosts of this lost world surface in the most unexpected ways. It's a quirky but true fact that fishermen trawling the North Sea in the area that was once Doggerland frequently pull up the bones of mammoths, woolly rhinos, and even the beautifully crafted stone tools of the humans who hunted them, all snagged in their fishing nets. This warming wasn't always gradual. Around 14,700 years ago, the climate experienced a period of shockingly abrupt warming known as the Berling-Allereux interstadial. What caused this sudden lurch in the climate system is a point of intense scholarly debate. Was it a sudden reorganization of the great Atlantic Ocean currents, or a fundamental shift in atmospheric patterns? Scientists are still working to understand the intricate machinery of our planet's climate that could cause such a violent and rapid thaw. Just as the world was breathing a collective sigh of relief, just as forests were beginning to reclaim the barren ground left by the retreating ice and life was adapting to the new warmth, the Ice Age played its final brutal card. The warming didn't just slow down, it violently reversed. Around 12,900 years ago, the Northern Hemisphere was plunged back into a sudden and savage deep freeze that lasted for over 1,000 years. This event is known as the Younger Dryas. It was as if the planet slammed on the climatic brakes and threw itself hard into reverse. The change was terrifyingly swift. Ice cores from Greenland show that average temperatures there may have plummeted by as much as 15 degrees Celsius, or 27 degrees Fahrenheit. in the space of a single human lifetime, possibly even just a decade. The great ice sheets, which had been in full retreat, stopped in their tracks and began to advance once more. The fledgling forests died off, and the cold, dry, wind-swept plains of the Mammoth steppe returned. It was the last great gasp of the Ice Age, a final bitter winter before the true dawn of our modern era. For decades, the cause of this dramatic reversal was a profound mystery. The leading and most widely accepted theory today points to a single colossal event in the heart of North America. As the Laurentide ice sheet melted, it created the enormous Lake Agassiz. The theory holds that the ice dam holding this immense body of fresh water finally broke, unleashing a cataclysmic flood that poured into the Arctic Ocean and the North Atlantic. This immense influx of cold, fresh water was less dense than the salty ocean water, so it floated on the surface, effectively shutting down the great ocean current known as the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. This current acts as a giant radiator, bringing warm tropical water to the north. Shutting it off was like flipping a switch, plunging Europe and North America back into near glacial conditions. The scientific evidence for this cold snap is found not in ice, but in the pollen of a tiny, tenacious flower. The event is named after Dryas octopetala, an Arctic wildflower that thrives in cold, tundra-like conditions. In lakebed sediments across Europe, you can see the layers of the warming period filled with the pollen of birch and pine trees. Then, abruptly, that tree pollen vanishes and is replaced by a thick layer of Dryas pollen, a clear and unambiguous signal that the forests had died and the tundra had returned. But in recent years, a more explosive and highly controversial alternative theory has emerged. This is the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. This idea proposes that the trigger for the deep freeze was not a flood, but a cosmic collision. Proponents argue that a fragmented comet or asteroid exploded over the North American ice sheet, and the resulting shockwave, heat, and dust thrown into the atmosphere triggered the sudden cooling, caused widespread wildfires, and contributed to the final extinction of the megafauna. And so, the scholarly debate rages. Was the final cold breath of the Ice Age caused by a deluge of meltwater from a dying glacier, or a blast of fire and ice from a dying comet? It remains a fascinating scientific detective story. The final bitter winter of the Younger Dryas could not last forever. Around 11,700 years ago, the planetary systems shifted one last time. The great ocean radiator turned back on, and the warmth returned to the northern hemisphere. This time, it was for good. The last remnants of the great ice sheets began to melt away with astonishing speed. This moment marks a profound boundary in the history of our planet. It is the end of the Pleistocene epoch and the beginning of our current, warmer and more stable geological era, the Holocene. The Ice Age was finally over, but it left behind a world that had been fundamentally and permanently remade. The glaciers were the greatest sculptors the world has ever known. As they retreated, they revealed landscapes that had been utterly transformed. They carved the deep, dramatic fjords of Norway and New Zealand, scraped out the vast basins that would become the Great Lakes of North America, and left behind the iconic U-shaped valleys of places like Yosemite. But they also gave a gift to the future. As the ice ground mountains down to dust, it created immense quantities of loess, a fine, mineral-rich silt. This dust was picked up by the winds and deposited in thick, fertile blankets across vast regions of the world, creating the incredibly productive agricultural soils of the American Midwest, the plains of Ukraine, and northern China. The land itself is still breathing a slow sigh of relief from the immense burden of the ice. This quirky and fascinating phenomenon is known as isostatic rebound. The sheer weight of the ice, miles thick, had literally pushed the Earth's crust down into the supple mantle beneath. As that weight was lifted, the land began to slowly rise back up, a process that is still happening today. In parts of Scandinavia and Scotland, ancient coastlines and Stone Age harbors now sit high and dry, miles inland, lifted over hundreds of feet by the buoyant land over the last 10,000 years. We can chart this final retreat with remarkable precision using the scientific evidence of varves, the annual layers of sediment that settle at the bottom of glacial lakes. Like tree rings, these layers provide a perfect calendar of the final years of the Ice Age. But the world the glaciers left behind was an emptier one. The faunal legacy of the Ice Age was one of profound loss. The great extinctions had swept the giants from the board. The Pleistocene was a world of mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and giant sloths. The Holocene that followed became a world of smaller, more adaptable creatures like deer, wild boar, and coyotes. The few remaining megafauna, like the elephants of Africa and Asia, are precious, living relics of a lost epoch. For your ancestors, this new, emptier world presented both a crisis and an opportunity. The disappearance of the great wandering herds that had sustained them for millennia forced a radical change in strategy. This pressure was the catalyst for the single greatest transformation in human history, the Neolithic Revolution. Faced with dwindling big game, people in multiple locations around the globe independently began to experiment with cultivating plants and domesticating animals. It was a shift from hunting and gathering to farming. Why did our ancestors give up the hunt for the back-breaking work of the farm? This is a fundamental scholarly debate. Was it a push factor, driven by the necessity of a world with fewer large animals? Or was it a pull factor, where the new, stable climate of the Holocene made agriculture a more reliable and productive choice? Whatever the trigger, this revolution set the stage for villages, cities, writing, and the entire world you know today. The legacy of the Ice Age is written not only in the mountains, valleys, and fertile plains of the world, but also in a much more intimate place. It is coded deep within the cells of nearly every creature alive today, including you. The relentless, punishing cycles of cold acted as a great filter for life, creating what biologists call evolutionary bottlenecks. As the ice advanced, populations were shattered, and only a few individuals, often in small, isolated pockets of refuge, managed to survive. The DNA of these few survivors became the blueprint for all the generations that followed, a phenomenon known as the founder effect. The Ice Age is not just a memory written in stone, it is a living history encoded in our very own genes. For our own species, this story has a surprising and profound twist. As your modern human ancestors migrated out of the warmth of Africa and into the cold, challenging landscapes of Ice Age Europe and Asia, they found that they were not alone. These continents were already home to other human species who had been living there for hundreds of thousands of years and were perfectly adapted to the cold, the Neanderthals and the Denisovans. And the scientific evidence, extracted from ancient bones and modern genomes, is now undeniable. We met them, and we interbred. Most humans today whose ancestry lies outside of Africa carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA. People of Melanesian and East Asian descent often carry Denisovan DNA as well. These are not just random genetic echoes. They were a crucial Ice Age survival toolkit. These ghost genes that we inherited are heavily involved in things like our immune system, providing a vital upgrade to help our African ancestors fight off the novel diseases of Eurasia. A specific Denisovan gene is what allows modern Tibetans to thrive in the low-oxygen environment of the high plateau. In a very real sense, the strength and resilience of our lost cousins lives on inside of us. Even some familiar physical traits may be a gift from our ancient relatives. It's a quirky but compelling theory that the genes responsible for red hair and fair skin in some modern humans are of Neanderthal origin. In the low-light, often overcast skies of Ice Age Europe, fairer skin would have been a significant advantage, as it is far more efficient at producing essential vitamin D from sunlight. This story of genetic bottlenecks and ancient intermingling is not unique to us. The famously low genetic diversity of the modern cheetah, for example, is thought to be the result of a severe population bottleneck it suffered at the end of the last Ice Age. Just how important was this ancient intermingling for the success of our species? This is a vibrant and ongoing scholarly debate in genetics and anthropology. Was this interbreeding a rare and relatively minor event, providing just a light dusting of helpful genes? Or was it a more significant factor, a critical exchange of adaptations that gave our ancestors the biological edge they needed to survive and ultimately thrive in a world of ice? The answer is still being decoded from the helix of our own DNA, the final living record of this lost world. The Ice Age shaped more than just our bodies and our DNA. It forged the very foundations of our minds, our societies, and the stories we tell ourselves. The brutal, unforgiving environment of the Pleistocene acted as a cognitive crucible, selecting for the specific mental traits that would allow our species to survive, and eventually to dominate the planet. This is perhaps the deepest and most human part of our Ice Age inheritance. To survive in that world required a new way of thinking. The relentless cycle of seasons, especially the long and brutal winters, demanded foresight and long-term planning. You couldn't just live day to day. You had to preserve food from the summer bounty, rendering fat and drying meat, to create a surplus that would see your family through the lean months of snow and ice. You had to know when to move, where to find shelter, and how to prepare for the coming cold. This ability to mentally project into the future, to plan and prepare for a reality that did not yet exist, became one of our most powerful cognitive tools. And you could not survive it alone. Facing down a herd of bison or a colossal mammoth was not a task for an individual. It required a new and profound level of social cooperation. The mammoth hunt was the ultimate team sport, demanding intricate communication, a deep understanding of each other's roles, and a level of trust and cohesion that bonded the group into a single, effective unit. The clan, the tribe, the band. This intense social reliance, born from the necessity of hunting giant prey and defending against giant predators, became the bedrock of human society. This intense pressure and newfound social complexity may be the reason for what archaeologists call the Great Leap Forward, an explosion of symbolic and creative thought during this period. The scientific evidence is clear in the archaeological record. This is when we see the first undisputed musical instruments, like delicate flutes carved from bird bone. We see the first elaborate personal adornments, like necklaces of ivory beads, and the first deeply meaningful burial rituals, where the dead were interred with tools and ornaments, suggesting a belief in an afterlife. Perhaps the most enigmatic and quirky artifacts from this time are the famous Venus figurines. These are small, intimate statuettes, usually carved from bone, ivory, or stone, depicting female figures with exaggerated features. They are found across Eurasia, from France to Siberia. What were they for? This is a scholarly debate that reveals just how alien the minds of our Ice Age ancestors can be to us. Were they religious idols representing a great mother goddess? Were they fertility charms, meant to ensure the survival of the clan in a dangerous world? Or were they something else entirely? Their true purpose is a secret they have kept for 30,000 years. But perhaps the most profound inheritance of all is not an artifact, but a story. Almost every culture on Earth has a myth of a great flood, a story of a world-ending deluge that wiped the slate clean. Where did this ancient universal story come from? It is entirely plausible that these myths are a direct cultural memory of the end of the Ice Age. The people who lived through the catastrophic draining of the great glacial lakes and watched the oceans rise to consume vast landscapes like Doggerland were witnessing a world-ending event. It may well be humanity's oldest, darkest, and most terrifying memory, passed down through thousands of generations, a final, ghostly echo of the Ice Age. And so, our long journey through the frozen landscapes of the Pleistocene comes to an end. We have walked with giants, huddled in caves with our ancient relatives, and witnessed the planet itself buckle, heave, and remake itself. The world you live in today, its coastlines, its fertile soils, its surviving animals, and the very foundations of your civilization, was forged in the crucible of that immense cold. But the story of ice on our planet is a cyclical one, a rhythm of deep planetary breathing that has continued for millions of years. We can read this rhythm with stunning clarity from the scientific evidence preserved in the Vostok Station ice core, a sample drilled nearly 4 kilometers deep into the Antarctic ice sheet. It provides a continuous, year-by-year climate record stretching back over 400,000 years. That record clearly shows the planet's pulse, long 100,000-year glacial periods of deep cold, punctuated by brief, warm interglacial periods, like the one we are in now, that last for only 10 to 15,000 years. Our warm, stable Holocene is not the norm. It is the exception. It is just a brief, sunny afternoon in a long, cold geological year. So, if this is just a temporary warm spell, when is the next ice age due? Based on the predictable clockwork-like Milankovitch cycles, the Earth should naturally be starting its slow, gentle descent back into a glacial period within the next 1,000 years or so. But there is a new force on the planet now, one that has, for the first time in history, broken this ancient and powerful cycle. That force is us. The colossal amount of carbon dioxide your species has pumped into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution has overwhelmed the natural cooling trend. We have, in a geological instant, created a super-interglacial, postponing the next ice age for at least 50,000 years, and perhaps much longer. Just a few centuries ago, the planet gave us a quirky little reminder of its natural tendency to cool. The Little Ice Age, a period of distinctly colder winters from about the 14th to the 19th centuries, saw glaciers advancing in the Alps and rivers freezing over in London. It was a faint echo of the planet's natural rhythm. But now we have pushed the system in a new direction. This has led scientists to a profound and ongoing scholarly debate. Have our actions been so significant that we have officially ended the Holocene and pushed the planet into a new geological epoch of our own making? The Anthropocene? It is a debate about whether we have truly left the shadow of the Ice Age behind and entered a new, uncertain, and human-made world. And now, the long journey is over. The echoes of the thundering herds of mammoths have faded into a soft and distant hum. The glint of ice from the great glaciers has softened into a gentle, faraway shimmer. The world of our ancestors, a world of struggle and wonder, of giant beasts and endless winters, has retreated back into the deep, quiet archives of time. All of the drama, the chaos, the colossal forces that shaped mountains and moved oceans have settled into a peaceful silence. The planet continues its slow and patient waltz through the cosmos, as it always has, and as it always will. The stories are now just stories, memories locked in stone and ice and in the deepest parts of who you are. But for tonight, the work is done. There are no more mountains to cross, no more predators to watch for. There is only the quiet of your room, the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, and the soft, welcoming pull of sleep. Let the great, cold silence of the past become a warm and peaceful quiet for your present. Let go of the immense weight of deep time and allow yourself to drift lightly and peacefully into your dreams.